So tonight, as part of a Henry Morton Stanley School of Christian Journalism, Fraud, Failure and Farce, the Land Expropriation Hearings. Isaiah 28 verse 15 says, "We have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we've hidden ourselves." That is so appropriate for what we are dealing and facing today. We're dealing with people who think they can make a refuge amongst lies, and they can make a pact with hell itself. Those of us who attended the parliamentary hearings regarding the African National Congress's plans to confiscate farms were given a classic example of how communist agitation, propaganda, or active measures works. Now, you may think, what's agitprop? There actually was a department in the Soviet Union called agitprop, short for agitation propaganda. Because propaganda and agitation go together, and the first major application was land reform, of course. You can see, taking land, industries, everything. They want to take every single aspect over. And here you can see the hammer and the sickle, and you can see all the different, so it's the factory workers and the farmers smashing out all opposition. Look what they're putting the hammer on. Peasants, actually, or kulaks, farmers. They were the main enemy, the kulaks. So dekulakization, getting rid of the kulaks or the farmers. Agitprop could be as subtle as this. You don't want to starve. You don't want to freeze. You don't want to starve. Do you want to eat and drink? Join the labor force work parties and the collectives. How subtle is that? And you may think, well, what's it got to do with us? Well, this is South Africa, 2018. And you've got, that's Che Guevara, and that is a 5-point star, black star and red with a hammer and sickle. And just like typical communist place, they've always got their idols up front. And the choice of red everywhere, and it does say communist cadres. So you don't need to mistake the fact that, you know what flag this is? Flag of the Southern Communist Party. Now, the Southern Communist Party does not put up candidates in the elections in South Africa. If you go onto the Southern Communist Party website, you will see the SACP is not putting up any candidates in the next elections, but advise all cadres to vote for the ANC candidate. Go onto the CPUSA, Communist Party USA website, and not only can you buy Lenin baseball caps, Lenin T-shirts, and Lenin pens, credit cards accepted, but it says that the Communist Party USA is not putting up any candidate in the next elections, but advises all cadres to vote for the Democratic Party candidate. Now, when they tell you to vote for another party, it means they control that party. Now, we've known that the Southern Communist Party controls the ANC for a very long time. And there hasn't been one ANC president who hasn't been a senior member of the Southern Communist Party. And, can anyone identify this delightful fellow? Blade Nzimande, who happened to be at the time cabinet minister for higher education in this country. At this time, the fees must fall and the roads must fall and everything else must fall and knowledge must fall and science must fall. You had a Communist Party member. Oh, he was not just a member. He was General Secretary of the Southern Communist Party while he was Minister of Education, higher education in the country. Just in case you thought communism's dead and has no influence in our life today, there are people running around wearing SACP T-shirts. And then, wait a minute, is this a different party? Oh, the EFF. But don't they look like they've got the same colour scheme as Southern Communist Party? Don't they look like, actually, the Communist Party in South Africa? In fact, the EFF is nothing other than the SACP, basically. And this is what they believe of free enterprise. This was these poor, this is a European H&M, H&M. They trashed their stores like this, and I don't know that they've been prosecuted for it. So huge crowds of uniformed EFF and ANC renter mobs were being busted hours before the event even began. We're talking about now Saturday, the 4th of August in Goodwood. There was a party atmosphere in more ways than one, and the venue, a large Apostolic Faith Mission church, which, by the way, is the same church where we did our planning for the marches on Parliament in 95 and 96. We met every week there, Mondays, for 6 weeks in the preparation, so I know that venue very well. But it was strewn with litter. The disruptive mods made it very hard for any Cape Townians to access the venue to give verbal testimony to the parliamentary subcommittee gathered there. Hundreds were not even able to get through the door, and they milled around outside, including members of City Council. I met Demi Dudley, for example, outside, and he was standing outside and he wasn't able to get in. Parliament had originally been advertised as the venue for the hearings, but barely a day before the event, a new venue was announced, leaving to much confusion. In fact, I asked Taryn, she assured me, no, it is Parliament said, but I'm seeing on social media people saying it's been changed to Goodwood, to Friends of God Church. Where's the Friends of God Church? It wasn't called that when I went there last. It was the AFM Church, so there was a lot of confusion. Considering how many municipal buildings and city halls and how Parliament itself is available to the government, it's inexplicable why they had to rent a church venue. What does the government have all these buildings for if they can't use them? Except perhaps they'd prefer to have a church venue trashed by the renter mob than a government building. Perhaps. It was then pointed out that this venue was ideal for the purpose of the EFF and ANC because it was just across the road from a McDonald's and a KFC. Yep, because it was free food for agit-prop renter mob. Reportedly, many of the EFF and ANC renter mob members had been promised free KFC or McDonald's lunches, and from the vast amounts of fast food litter around the grounds of the church after lunch, that certainly seemed to be the case. Now, I didn't notice it, but others, like Christopher Leon, an advocate, pointed out that he saw the buses that came in. He said all of them had Eastern Cape number plates. He said these people weren't even from Cape Town. They were bussed in from the Eastern Cape, or Transkei. Considering that each citizen who wanted to give verbal testimony was limited to 3 minutes, now they advertised 3 to 5 minutes. When you got to find 3 minutes, strictly 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes. And they've allocated 5 hours, 11 to 4. That means a maximum of 100 people, 20 an hour, could have spoken. That's assuming everything went on time and they didn't take an age to introduce. As it was, with even the delays and disruptions and going to almost 5 o'clock, less than 80 people out of 2,000 were able to speak, of all the people crammed into this building. Notice, by the way, the large amount of yellow ANC T-shirts around there, and then you can see some of the red EFFs as well. This just gives you a bit of a feel. Kicking off the hearing, the chairman of the proceedings informed everyone that this was a sitting of Parliament. Not like a sitting of Parliament, it was a sitting of Parliament, he kept saying. Therefore, everyone needed to behave accordingly. Sort of wondered what that meant. No politicizing, no shouting, no clapping, no booing, no disruptive behavior would be tolerated. Sounded promising. The chairman then assured us that the parliamentarians sitting on this platform were only present to listen. They would not be saying a single word, not the whole day. They've come to hear the people of Cape Town, come to hear you. We want to hear what you've got to say. And this is then repeated in Xhosa. They'd assured us beginning that they'd repeated in all 3 official languages, English, Xhosa, Afrikaans. But when the translator is about to repeat the introduction Afrikaans, he is told not to bother. Just like that. After telling us the members of Parliament would not say a single word all day, the chairman then gave each parliamentarian an opportunity to introduce themselves, which seemed to contradict what he had just said. But I suppose these guys are pathological liars and I don't even know the meaning of words. Member of Parliament Steve Swartz of the African Christian Democratic Party greeted everyone in the name of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ and reminded all present that we were gathered in the house of God and should behave accordingly. And there's some abuse shouted at him from some of the mob gathered. Well, that was about the high point, and it was downward hill after that. Then followed an incredible scene of one EFF member, which I think stands for Everything for Free Party, standing up of the parliamentary committee on the platform, making rousing political statements and shouting slogans which encouraged mob hysteria, screams and dancing by the unruly members and supporters in the crowd. In fact, it seemed that they were there for just that purpose. There's a lot of people there for no other purpose than to scream when they shout, "Amandla, where to?" and other sort of slogans like that. Now, considering the EFF only obtained around 6% of the votes countrywide in the last national elections, much less than that in Cape Town, that's for sure, it's extraordinary to see 12 of the 23 members of the parliamentary committee were EFF. I mean, just look at the red outfits up there. Just started. Now, where's the DA? This is meant to be a DA constituency, you heard. Although the Democratic Alliance are meant to be the majority party in the Western Cape, We only noticed one person representing DA stand up from the floor to give any reaction to proposed amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. In fact, I even heard the person. I asked others, and somebody said they'd heard someone who identified himself as DA. But I didn't see DA people in the venue, but I saw a lot of DA people gathering on the other side of the road. They had some kind of meeting outside. I saw a whole lot wearing blue tea. But if they're the majority party in the Western Cape, why were they absent from the fight? Totally absent from the fight. We didn't hear from them. I mean, they were, in fact, none of them on the platform as part of the parliamentary committee even objected in point of order to the abuse of the rules continually. So the DA were around, and the DA are able to go to the old matches, but seems they're incapable of confronting the enemy in an event like this, which is where it really counts. So shame on them. Cowards and deserters. The vast majority of those chosen by the chairman to represent our concerns in the Cape, as they put it, were uniformed EFF and ANC renter mob, plainly. Very few supporters of ACDP, Freedom Front or Cape Party were granted any opportunity to speak, and almost no DA supporters were in evidence inside the venue. So did you get the impression they were boycotting?
Yeah, they were that's the word. They boycotted. They weren't going to go.
Well, that's a bit pointless.
No,
It's like a soldier boycotting the battle.
they had to cross the road on the other side.
Shame on him. That's a fat lot of use, isn't it? Well, they adopt the idols of the ANC, so they might as well adopt their slogans too. They adopted a lot of their policies. Yes, my co-conspirator in counter-revolution, Michel Lemay, got me ahead in the queue. And who's this Solidarity chap? National Front. His name is Daniel. Yes, Daniel Lotter. So we were distinctly ignored, even though our arms were up as opportunities that we wanted to speak. Interesting, when asked who wants to speak, very few people raised their hands. So vast majority weren't there to speak, and from those who were sleeping, vast weren't even there to listen. They were just there to take our seats. Throughout the over 5 hours of this hearing, the chairman continued to choose uniformed EFF and ANC people as the predominant amount of members of the public permitted to give any kind of verbal testimony. Time and again, you'd hear the chairman choose speakers saying, the man with the red beret, the man wearing the yellow ANC T-shirt, the lady with the ANC headdress, the man in the red EFF shirt, the man in the red EFF jacket, the man wearing the ANC shirt. Literally. So you've got to be kidding. And did any of them have anything intelligent to say? Not in your life. At the by-election last year in Brackenfell, the DA received about 70% of the vote. The Cape Party received 19% of the vote. And the Freedom Front received 9% of the vote. ACDP, ANC and EFF all received less than 1% of the vote. EFF got 0.01% of the vote. Now, fair enough, that's just one major area of Cape Town, Brackenfell. But there's no doubt that the vast majority of voters in South Africa in Cape Town support the DA, and only a very small minority support the EFF. The EFF is not a major party in the Cape. You would never have known that from these so-called hearings in Goodwood on the 4th of August on Saturday. Although there were quite a fair number of Cape Party supporters wearing their distinctive shirts, can't miss them, none of them were chosen to speak. Not one was selected. Vast amounts of EFF who, they're not even really a Cape Party at all. In the end, when one person supporting the Cape Party but not wearing any Cape Party identification stood up to speak, she's actually assaulted by members of the renter mob in the upper gallery. And fortunately, her husband and Carla were close enough to grab this person and pin him down as he was trying to assault her because he didn't like what she was saying. When Jack Miller of the Cape Party stood up to speak, the abusive threats and shouting so drowned him out it was hard to hear most of what he said. Now, you can go onto the Cape Party on the Cape Republic Facebook page and see the video. You can see it. You have trouble hearing what he said because it was non-stop, constant heckling. You could not make out most of what was being said. Everybody listened quietly and respectfully to the endless repetition of radical communist rhetoric and repeating of mindless slogans. Repetitive is the word. Just nothing new, nothing even intelligent. Yet the moment anyone started to comment critically, by the way, you'll notice Eugene over there, one of our friends from Kwasabunta Mission. But when anyone spoke critically or with common sense on the proposed amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution, they were shouted down by increasingly loud and abusive threats and insults. Now, Eugene managed to get through most of it with not too much abuse, but they got more confident because the chairman let them get away with it, that they got more and more abusive and more loud as the day progressed. Although the chairman on numerous occasions said that I will not warn you again. No shouting, no booing or heckling. The abuse of shouting, heckling, blatant politicization was not just tolerated, it was actually encouraged because the noise became so deafening you couldn't hear what many individuals were saying. You could tell it was positive because they were being shouted out. Because if they were speaking communist nonsense, then nobody would heckle, despite the use of microphones and a PA system. Now, looking around the chaotic scene inside the Friends of God Church in Goodwood, you could see huge swathes of area dominated by red berets of the EFF or the yellow shirts and jackets and headdress of the ANC. You could also see young people. I mean, some of these people are really young. I didn't see these little girls in front of us ever raise their hand to want to speak. What were they there for? They weren't there to speak. In fact, later they were sleeping. So many of these were just teenagers, and most of the people around there had no intention of taking part in it. Their only purpose was to occupy seats to ensure that most of the Cape Townians who came to participate in the hearings would not have space inside and be forced to remain voiceless outside. In fact, one of our friends reported back in the media workshop held on Saturday. She said she is sitting next to an EFF chairman. He identified himself as the EFF chairman for Cape Town. And while she's talking to him, a couple of their organizers came running up in their outfits and said, the people are getting restless. They want their KFC now and drinks. And he quickly got on the phone and ordered, and said vehicles are coming. And it was that blatant. They were not even hiding the fact that they had come promised free food, free drinks and so on. This was Rent-A-Mob. The Joint Constitutional Review Committee's public hearings, that's what they called it, on amending Section 25 of the Constitution seemed to have been a complete fraud. Even before the hearings began in the Western Cape, ANC President, for want of a better word, Cyril Ramaphosa, announced that no matter what, the ANC is going ahead with expropriation of land from whites without compensation. We can take the land from the whites and give it to our people, he said. Our people. So we're not their people. We're not South Africans now. It was a farce because no attempt was made to enforce the rules, and blatant politicizing and slogan shouting. The chairman was beyond worthless, absolutely worthless. Mob rule was not just tolerated, it was encouraged by members of the committee who would stand up and shout their political slogans and whip the people up like knee-jerk reaction. And I saw this and took a picture of this, and Alicia goes with me, looked at this, and when she looked at the people standing around her, they said, yes, you deserve this. An axe? Why? Instead of reasoned debate and discussion, considering facts and evidence of case studies in recent history, repetitive shouting of slogans and deliberate wasting of time ensured that the majority of Cape Townians who had come to contribute to the discussion were not able to be heard. That was the purpose. It was plainly a failure, fraud, failure, and farce. Because if the intention had been to investigate whether it was necessary to amend Article 25 of the Constitution, considering how they tolerated mobs of uniform political agitators to fill much of the venue and to dominate the vast majority of the hearings, this had to be totally planned, orchestrated. Nobody could be that stupid. It couldn't have just happened by accident. Now, as a missionary who has served suffering people throughout Africa for over 37 years, it is clear to me that the planned expropriation without compensation would be counterproductive, if the aim is to help the people, that is. In every case where expropriation without compensation has been implemented, the result has been far greater poverty and suffering for the poor and for the most vulnerable. The case studies include Soviet Union, Stalin Soviet Union, where decolonization land reform, they called it land reform, resulted in the hunger plague, the Holodomor, which killed 11 million people and displaced 18 million people who lost their homes. Yes, they had the red flags as well. And yes, they had this, oh, look at those happy looking farmers over there. And these wonderful big tractors of the 5-year plan. And yep, here you can see the Politburo, local commissars with banners and so on are overseeing the people who used to farm their family farm, and now they have the joy of farming some collective where everything goes to the state. And yes, literally all their produce, everything they had, all their grain stocks were shipped out deliberately to starve the people. This is grain confiscations in the Ukraine. And is this not pitiful? This is a political propaganda picture. This isn't something smuggled out. And some of the people are actually smiling for the pictures and so on as they've been urged to. And you can see some of the uniformed guards standing around watching these people on their hands and knees having to deal with the farms. I mean, where are the tractors that they keep talking about in the 5-year plans? And these are actual Ukrainian children wasting away. This was reported at the time. People knew. I mean, before the Second World War, before Britain and America poured in billions and trillions of dollars and pounds worth of aid and sending them Spitfires and Sherman tanks and everything else, they knew that millions of Russians had been systematically starved to death as policy by Stalin before they happily sat together and called them allies fighting for freedom. Holodomor, it comes from the Ukrainian words holo, which is hunger, and more, which is plague, so it's a hunger plague, murder by starvation. There are people who still try to remember this because nobody in Hollywood seems interested in commemorating it. Most people know nothing about the genocide of Ukrainians 1932 to 1933, which is called land reform. But they do have memorial in Ukraine, and it's been dramatized in a film that came out last year, Bitter Harvest, which is well worth seeing. It's a accurate, honest, but manages to maintain a positive spirit of resistance. It doesn't get so stuck into showing you the horrors, but you know what's going on, even though most of it's off camera. But Bitter Harvest, well worth seeing. It's part of our library here. Red China, where Mao Zedong's great cultural revolution was the second phase of the revolution there, it destroyed millions of lives, thousands of years of Chinese history and culture, and led to widespread famine. However, when you see the political pictures, boy, does this look good. And, well, not only is this completely unrealistic, but why are they showing you a picture of it, a portrait, when you could have a photograph? Why don't they have a photograph of these happy people with a super abundant crops? And look at those bananas there and so on. I mean, this looks really great. And, yep, Chairman Mao's pictures on the wall. Little kiddie's got the Communist Party flag, and the people look well-dressed, happy. Even the chicken looks happy. And, I mean, this is propaganda. Okay, now we get to the photographs. Look at this. Look at the spontaneous joy of the people. And they all managed to bring out a picture, exactly the same picture and the same size. Nevertheless, it's obviously a spontaneous expression of their love and devotion to the chairman of the Communist Party, Chairman Mao. And here you see these happy little Red Brigade Communist Party youth characters with their red scarves marching off. Now, this is why the second phase of the revolution normally happens about 20 years after the political first phase of the revolution. You need a generation of people who didn't know what it was like to grow up in nationalist China or Tsarist Russia or Ian Smith's Rhodesia or apartheid South Africa. And so you've got a new generation of born frees who don't have a clue what they're talking about, like jujus, who can then be ruthless with... Now, this is a farmer. So this is land reform in China. Farmers being tied up. And now a key part of this is something akin to TRC. Your goal is to humiliate the elders, the farmers, the pastors, the leaders, the teachers, the journalists, the intelligentsia, whoever were those represent the past, the priests, whatever. And they'd bring them before the population, and they would have to confess their crimes, and they'd be humiliated. And they'd shave their heads, they'd drag them out in front of the people, and they'd stand them on a box where they'd have to confess their crimes and be written for those who weren't able to hear. And they'd have to endure abuse. You can see this person's had all kinds of things thrown over him. Maybe that's even his blood on his shirt. And then finally, after humiliating them long enough, they would have them killed. This is land reform, second phase of the revolution in China. 69 million people died in the second phase of the revolution, the Great Cultural Revolution in China. The Great Famine. Would you believe, after all land reform, People starved by the millions. Who would have guessed? Who could have anticipated that? The Red Terror under Mengistu in Ethiopia. I remember at school we had to raise money for the starving in Ethiopia. Ethiopia used to export food. Ethiopia has the potential to feed the whole of Africa. Could have been fed from Ethiopia. Ethiopia used to export food until the communists took over. Land reform under Mengistu. Here's Colonel Mengistu. And again, see any comparison in color of flags that the people like? Why is it always red? And this is part of the land reform. The biggest forced removal since the Second World War. They forced about 18 million people away from their homes and their farms. And people died by the millions. Some of them they helped along the way with public hangings. And we saw pictures like this. As in school, I remember we had to raise money for the children starving in Ethiopia. Why were they starving in Ethiopia? Land reform. Communist land reform. Socialism. Karl Marx in action. And do you know how they handled the relief aid? On my first visit to Germany for Christian Action back in 1988, I was at 1987, I was in a group where I had a dinner with a whole lot of sponsors of the Kirchentag, and I was sitting right next to a Daimler-Benz, Mercedes-Benz director. He's a very high-level person. He had just come back from Ethiopia, so I was fascinated to find out more about Ethiopia. What were you there for? Well, he says the Ethiopian government insists that all relief aid that comes to Ethiopia must be accompanied by 18-wheeler Mercedes-Benz trucks. They've got to be Daimler-Benz trucks, and to transport the relief aid that World Vision or Band-Aid are donating to them, Tier Fund and so on. Oh, so why were you there? He says, well, you see, he says they've made quite an industry out of this. So if somebody wants to give, say, $1 million worth of aid to Ethiopia, they've got to pay $1 million tax. So 100% import tax on the free relief aid. And they've got to bring a certain amount of Daimler-Benz trucks in to transport those things. And when they come there, the trucks have to be signed over to the Ethiopian government to distribute them. So they can't take them back once they've finished the transportation. And so he said, I was there because they were having one of the regular complaints that these trucks had broken down. I said, trucks broke down? He says, our trucks are well made. He said, but they're not designed to carry T-62 tanks on the back. These Daimler-Benz trucks bought by relief agencies are being used to transport tanks. Yes, he says, the food's rotting on the dockside or being exported to Cuba or Russia or Romania, and the trucks that have been bought by the relief agencies in order to transport the food is being used to transport Russian tanks. He says these tanks can't travel as far in the distances and the roads are very bad too. So they are using our trucks, which are not made for transporting a 60-ton tank on the back of it. So I said, so what do you say? He said, well, we said that if they persisted with this foolishness, we would expose to the world what they're doing. I said, are they doing this? He said, yes. Are you going to expose? No. Why not? He said, well, we're selling a lot of trucks to Ethiopia. That was just one insight, and I'm abbreviating a whole evening of insights into what goes on, how you run a famine. Communist countries are past masters in organizing famine. And a key part of famine is you've got to get rid of the farmers. How can you possibly sell bottled water to people unless you create a water shortage? And so on. The disastrous land reforms of Julius Nyerere in Tanzania are also worth looking at, because he actually apparently really meant well. He didn't intend to starve the people to death intentionally. It happened. At least he wasn't machine gunning the people to death like they were in China. But even his well-meaning socialist plans were complete and utter total catastrophe and failure, and was later banned. And Nyerere even admitted it was a failure, to his credit. Then there's the catastrophic famine that resulted from Samora Michel's communist land reform in Mozambique. By the way, here you can see 4 of the worst socialists out there. From Bob Mugabe, that dates this one, and Kenneth Kaunda, absolute catastrophe. Samora Michel, and there's old Sam Ajoma, the least educated leader in Africa, at least before Zuma, at least. I think he had was the grade 4 stand for. And yes, you find Uncle Fidel Castro turns up for every revolution. He's always there to guide his protégés in extending the Cuban colonies in Africa. And I came across churches where youngsters were being forcibly sent off to be slaves in the Cuban sugarcane plantations to pay for the Cuban troops who were burning down their churches. Couldn't even have them burn your churches and kill your people for free. They had to send their children over to be slaves in the sugarcane plantation of Cuba. Think how many people are angry about the slaves that worked in American plantations in Georgia in the 1850s, which is about 170 years ago. But they don't care about the slaves in the Cuban communist fields in our lifetime. I took this picture. Russian ships that come in, laden with tanks, trucks, helicopter gunships into Beira, going out also low in the water, low. What do they take out? Food. I took these pictures of children dying of starvation, mothers emaciated. These children died of starvation within the week. We took them vitamin-enriched milk. It was too late. When you see skulls and bones, human skulls and bones around a fire, you know that cannibalism is back. That's how bad it got in Mozambique. 1 million people died of starvation in Mozambique this is a green country, which grows pineapples wildly and so on, which used to export food. This was land reform in Mozambique. I've documented that in the killing fields of Mozambique. The complete destruction of the once agriculturally rich food exporting Angola, and more recently Robert Mugabe's catastrophic land confiscations in neighboring Zimbabwe. How many case studies would people like? In fact, could they name us one single case in history where expropriation without compensation has ever resulted in increased food production and food security, as our present Premier wants to tell us? Robert Mugabe's insane hatred and greed led to this. This is land reform in Zimbabwe. Before and after. Exactly the same home. See where the chimney is? See the entrance? That's the same place. That's land reform. And these are land reformers. And this is the result of land reform. And this was a home. And too male, too pale, wrong color, beaten, murdered. And again, we see just a few examples of land reform in Zimbabwe. And change is not necessarily progress. And they might speak about hope and change, but the hope is normally ill-founded. And the whole country gets overloaded and everything falls to pieces, just like this bucky will not last. And what did they use before ox-drawn carts? Vehicles. What they used before electricity? What they used before candles and kerosene lamps? Electricity. This is change in Zimbabwe. And this is land reform. And it is a deception. Land reform, deception. Political opportunism in Zimbabwe's land seizure era. Catherine Buckle is a real bleeding heart liberal. She is as liberal as they come. She's one of these people who really believed in the Mugabe Zimbabwe. And she's documented how her farm was destroyed, taken, everything else. And she really tried everything. And she is one of these super excited over the overthrow of Mugabe end of last year. And Catherine Buckle, she writes African Tears. She went to register to vote. They were all very happy to have her being registered to vote until the supervisor came and said, no, she's white, she can't. But she's born Zimbabwean. No, can't register to vote. So someone born in Zimbabwe has poured a whole heart and soul in Zimbabwe, a whole life. Still too pale. Well, the people in Zimbabwe have suffered long enough to know Mugabe's a liar and Mugabe's starving his own people. Well, yes, that's pretty obvious to anyone who's been in Zimbabwe. We know why you're in South Africa. Life in Zimbabwe is murder these days. Indeed. No jokes. Political power is built on the backs of the poor. In every single case, dictators accumulated more power even while they violated their promises and oppressed the very people they claimed to be serving. And this is the main thing. Forget the verbiage. Forget what they're saying. It's all a distraction. It's all a lie. This is what these politicians do all the time. Whether the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cambodian Revolution, the Vietnam, this isn't just Africa, this is everywhere. This is the way revolutionaries work. They promise the earth, land, peace, whatever. And the fact that the very people who've been the forefront of the revolution are just cannon fodder and they're going to die of starvation or get shot in the back of the head or flee. Do you think the people up top care? Stalin, Mao, Mengistu, Mugabe, Ramaphosa? Why would they care? This is what they think of the people. Beating these women who'd gathered for prayer outside a government building in the eve before an election. Land expropriation are always disastrous. They're guaranteed pathways to starvation. Every single time. A century of socialist economic failures apparently proves nothing. This time it's going to be different. Okay, it's failed everywhere else, but not this time. Evicting capable, experienced farmers from land their families have carved out of the wilderness and out of the thorn bushes and cultivated, it'll curtail food production. It'll create hardships. It'll create unemployment. Obviously, socialist land reform always leads to starvation in the cities. Now, people in the countryside might be able to eke out a subsistence farming existence, but what can the people in the cities do? In Harare and in Bulawayo, the people had to flee back to the countryside, so couldn't sustain their life in the cities. But they had a place to go back to, and Zimbabwe is mostly rural. So, or even though half the Zimbabwean population fled, they had a place to go. Well, they fled to Mozambique, they fled to Zambia, they fled to Botswana and South Africa, and they fled to the countrysides. Places like Bulawayo were almost depopulated for a time during the worst of this. But where are the South Africans going to flee? Most South Africans don't have rural connections. This is what land reform looks like in Zimbabwe. And don't worry, you can buy some rats. The goal is not farming, the goal is looting. When you see these people exuberantly excited there, it's not that they want to have hard work. Farming is hard work. It takes expertise, it takes experience. As the Zimbabwean experience showed, most of those advocating expropriation without compensation are not interested in getting up early to plow the fields and milk the cows. They don't want to get up with the chickens. You're kidding. Most are not interested in cultivating crops at all. They just want to loot productive farms, smash the equipment, burn their farms and homes, and go back to the city to watch TV. That's the truth. We want land. We demand the land. We're going to burn things. But here's the facts. South African land reform. Okay. According to the Restitution of Land Rights Act signed by Mandela in 1994, they have, since 1994, the Land Rights Act has settled 77,000 claims. They've acquired over 3 million hectares of farmland. They have compensated 371,000 families. That means people who wanted to get money instead of the land. Beneficiaries, 1.8 million people have benefited. Total cost to date, 29 billion rand. The governor's paid. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but bear in mind that every year they bail out SAA to the tune of over 5 billion, and they spend more than 15 billion on VIP security for parliamentarians and so on. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing. Notice the land claims. Notice where most land claims have been done. Western Cape, 210. The Western Cape's done a lot. Limpopo's done a whole 2. One in Northwest, 4 in Gauteng and so on. So they're not doing very well on land claims. This is now just 2013, 2014. The report on land reform has shown that the reason why land reform has failed so far is primarily because of corruption and incompetence. Now, this is the government's own report done by the caretaker president between Mbeki and Zuma, McLachlan. Yes, exactly, that one. The one whose name I struggle to pronounce. That short, but he just chaired an investigation which has taken a few years into land reform. And he basically came to the conclusion that it's not that there's not enough willing sellers for willing buyers. It's not that there's not enough land in the hands of the government. It's that there's been massive corruption. And the reason why they haven't been very successful in these provinces is because there's higher rates of corruption and incompetence in these, who are all appointees of the ANC, mind you. Here's a fact. White South Africans own 357,000 hectares of urban land and 26 million hectares of agricultural land. South Africa's 122 million hectares, which means white people privately own 22% of the land, most of which is in the Karoo and the Kalahari and is pretty arid and almost desert. So who owns the other 78%? Well, either government or black people. So this business of, 80% or 90% of the best farming land, well, why is it called the best farming land? Well, because they've made it the best farming land. Over 10 years ago, Dr. Philip du Toit wrote The Great South African Land Scandal, where he looked at willing buyer, willing seller land reform, where they'd take a productive farm from one farmer and then they'd give it to a co-op or whatever and run by some government official, and disaster. They cooked and dried all of dairy cows and all sorts of dumb things, just destroyed, wrecked, messed up. And many of these farms, the farm workers have ended up in squatter camps in town because they used to live nice lives on a farm, and now the farm's derelict. They can't even sustain themselves and their families. And so it's one scandal after another. The Southern government is at this moment sitting on over 4,000 farms that were handed over by previous white owners, willing buyer, willing seller, but were never transferred to black owners. Why don't they just start with the farms they've got in their hand? They've got more land than actually all the farmers do. Why interfere with a commercially capable, experienced farmer? Recent history demonstrates the disaster of government interference in the economy, in any economy, whatever the government gets involved in. If they set minimum wages, they create unemployment. Whatever they do, they set prices, next thing you can't find the materials. Like in Zimbabwe, Mugabe set the price of bread at the baker said, but it'll cost us more to produce it than we can sell it for, so we're not going to produce the bread. Next thing, you couldn't get bread in Zimbabwe. It's that kind of, every time a government interferes in market economy, and governments can't understand market economy anyway. I mean, if they could do business, they'd be doing business. There wouldn't be politicians in. It also demonstrates the disaster of breaking God's commands. You shall not steal. And thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Not even the oxen who pulls a plough, the means of production. Private ownership property is written into the 10 Commands. And so you get Juju, who knows nothing about anything apparently. The time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice. And how do you get justice? By stealing. We must ensure we restore the dignity of our people. How do you restore the dignity of black people? By making them thieves, liars, racists, murderers, and have them starving to death where they've got to beg for food from foreign aid? How does that restore anyone's dignity? This is 1984 George Orwell Newspeak. Missionaries are busy caring for the casualties of just such irresponsible political decisions made in Zimbabwe, in the Congo, and other socialist experiments. Like this, in Zimbabwe, in Sudan, and in Ethiopia, in Eritrea. Yes, all over Africa, you've got people starving as a result of just such mindless, short-sighted socialist experiments based on hate, greed, and covetousness. How do you restore people's dignity? By getting them in line to beg food from some Peace Corps liberal bleeding heart from America who has probably voted for Hillary and comes out to help the victims of their kind of policies that they advocate anyway. Let's not follow in the footsteps of failure. And there's quite a few failures around that you can just see. We drive across Africa, and if we stopped for every time we saw a wreck of a 18-wheeler truck, we wouldn't get to our destination in time. You could take no end of those pictures. But I suspect that the present policy of expropriation without compensation is being cynically promoted to distract voters from the failure of government. The failure of government and the looting of the country by excessive taxation, inflation, and corruption. That's the trio that's responsible for most of the problems in the country. Corruption, inflation, and taxation. Those are the three big giants that are causing almost all of our problems. Get rid of those 3, and we've solved our problem. Together we move South Africa forward. Really. It's like they're moving us backwards, actually. They can't even spell school. They can't even handle litter. They can't even handle pollution. They cannot even clean the streets. They can't even deal with crime. They can't deal with lawlessness and violence. In fact, they incite it. When you've got government leaders speaking irresponsibly, saying that all of our problems are the fault of the whites, and all of our problems are the fault of the colonials, and if we can just burn enough things and destroy enough things, you're going to get paradise. Sort of like the Darwinian evolutionary social theory. The whole world came as a result of a big explosion, so if you can just burn enough things down, blow enough things up, paradise will come in the morning, surely. This has got to help. I mean, this is going to bring prices down. It's going to make service delivery so much easier. If you can just loot enough things, burn enough things, everything's going to get better. This is the result of irresponsible politicians. They're encouraging the destruction of property. If you don't respect life and property, you can't have civilization. How can we live in community with people if you've got one group teaching their people to hate and to resent another group of people? That's a recipe for civil war. That's a recipe for chaos, disaster. And these are people's lives being wrecked and ruined. This in Hout Bay, of course, which welcomed the squatters in with their liberal enthusiasm. And after giving them so much generosity, they were rewarded by the very people there that they've been helping, burning everything out. Even fire brigade stations being burned. What's going to happen when a fire brigade station's vehicles are all burned out? Well, they can't come and help you when your house on fire. Blocking roads, burning things on roads. Roads cost a lot to build. I've got a suspicion he's not carrying that hammer to repair something. Looting shops. Now notice, these are some small shops and of course nothing says freedom more than looting a bottle store. And a lot of these are actually small shops, and many of these people may not have insurance or be people who have put their entire life into the shop. And you loot the shop and you've destroyed some family's life and livelihood. How can the police not notice that this is being stolen? You can't exactly put this in your pocket. And again, these are just family businesses which are destroying families. May Day this year, just on the N3, just at the Moy River tollgate, they looted and burned out 39 Pentechnicons, each of which must have cost who knows how many millions in terms of the vehicle and the contents. Where were the police? Why is it that they can only turn up for forensics afterwards? These people can give you a speeding ticket, but they can't seem to protect property. And Cape Town, burning out of railways. This is not going to help. But the police are on it. And, yep, this is what we've got now, the new South African Police Service. And they are as asleep as the politicians in charge. And by the way, in case you thought Zuma and Ramaphosa were enemies, in case you thought that Julius and Cyril are opponents, in case you thought that the DA and the EFF are on opposite ends of the spectrum, bear in mind they're in alliance together in several cities around this country. For over 20 years, the poorest South Africans have loyally voted for the ANC, and for the past 20-odd years, they've been slowly becoming poorer, actually fast becoming poorer. The ANC has become very wealthy. That's the way socialism works. You vote ANC if you want an abundance of crime, legalized rape, steal from whites, corruption, precinct fraud, and be the new Zimbabwe. So what's our Christian response to race politics? Race politics is highly irresponsible. We need to learn to love our neighbor, not to covet and envy and hate and resent. We need a Christian work ethic, not socialist greed and yet another failed state. We've got enough failed states. Think of the billions of rand wasted, squandered every year by the ANC on VIP protection for parliamentarians, the Blue Light Brigade, which we experienced what that was like for the first time this week. And they have a lot of money to protect the parliamentarians, even while I want to take away your ability to protect yourself. And think of the billions of rand they squander every year on bailing out the South African Airways, which used to be not just economically viable, but SAA in the 1970s and 80s was regularly voted one of the top 10 airlines in the world, and sometimes even the top airline. Sometimes we'd even push Swiss Air out, and SA would be the top airline in the world for service. Well, I think we'd be lucky if we were not in the bottom 10 right now. We're probably somewhere down in number 100 or something. The SA standards are so shocking. I will not fly SA if I have any choice at all. But we pour more money into SA than into land reform. Because think of the difference between Britain and America, how they ended slavery. Britain ended slavery by voting £20 million sterling, that's in 1807, 1833 I should say, which compensated the owners so that they would not mind setting the slaves free, and provided training and tools for the freed slaves so that they would be able to set themselves up in business. And the British paid 20 million sterling and avoided a war. The Americans lost 650,000 people killed in a civil war, which cost billions of dollars. So which is a better way? Without compensation or with compensation? The Southerners were all willing to set free their slaves, as I said, but we paid investment to Yankee Northerners who sold them to us in the first place, who brought them across the Atlantic. We want some return on our investment. And if they just compensated, they would have. I'm not saying it's morally equivalent, but if you want something, pay for it. It's actually cheaper than going the war route. Think of the billions squandered bailing out the state-controlled EXCOM, the so-called electricity provider, which is run at a loss all the time, despite us paying more and more and more for less and less. All of this money could have been better spent investing in agriculture and training rural farmers and other entrepreneurs. Stop greed, stop ESCOM. I can only agree. Agri-SA, in a 2018 transformation report released in April this year, reports on spending over 331 million, this is a private initiative, on transformation initiatives nationally, with 109,000 black farmers benefiting from their training and development, mentorship and farming initiatives. Now, it's quite clear that private initiatives, private enterprise, such as these, are far more effective and far more sustainable model. They've achieved more with their 331 million than the state has with their billions and billions and billions, which have actually gone backwards. So leave private, when it comes to feeding, for example, a starving, whether you're talking about Zimbabwe or Sudan, let private groups like Samaritan's Purse deal with it. They'll do it far better. Person to person, church to church, mission to community. When governments get involved and you get NGOs, UN, World Food Programme, the result is more corruption, more starvation, more suffering. But there's a few top elite ones, they do well out of it. That's surely far better than the failed state land grabs, which have only led to greater poverty and starvation around the world. This is evident everywhere it's been implemented. I mean, this ship was well named. Karl Marx was a catastrophe and a disaster. Karl Marx's wife committed suicide. 2 of his daughters committed suicide. He must have been a bundle of laughs to live with. 3 of his children died of starvation. Karl Marx never did a day's work in his life. All of his economic theories have failed when implemented everywhere. And yet he's taught in our colleges like he's an authority on economics. He's an absolute total catastrophe. Karl Marx is one of the most reprehensible people ever to have wasted oxygen on planet Earth. Expropriation without compensation is in blatant violation of our Constitution. What is Section 25? Private ownership property. No one shall be deprived of private ownership property without just and fair compensation according to market prices. Now, it's not unreasonable. It's even saying they can come to a person and take their land, but they've got to compensate them. Now, expropriation with compensation can be really bad. But without compensation, it's just theft. It's illegal by our own Bill of Rights and by our own laws. And by the way, this isn't just speaking about farms. Section 25 deals with property. That means your intellectual property, your cell phone, your car, any property. This isn't just speaking about farms. It'll affect all of us. It's dangerous to erode constitutional safeguards. To give a politician more power is suicidal. They will take more power, and it'll be at our expense. It would be catastrophic to break our own laws for political opportunism. especially for such unreliable people as these. It would be economic suicide to violate the laws of God and the laws of economics. To chase away employers, investors, and tourists would result in millions more unemployed and much greater suffering and even starvation. The amount of people who hear, well, it's been 24 years and it's not enough. Now it's time for us to... Don't they see the problem? They keep voting for socialist, corrupt, political opportunists to hold to failed socialist theories, who liars, thieves, who filled their bank accounts in their pockets, who are fat on the land, living on the gravy train. The problem is the people who keep voting for. It's not to suddenly give them more power so they could stay in power for longer, a la Mugabe. It would be insane to destroy our productive agricultural sector with this highly irresponsible political scheme. And that's putting it mildly. Expropriation without compensation would be a betrayal of the vision of a united, colourblind South Africa, where never, 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 never again will any South African be discriminated against on the basis of their hate. Who said that? Oh, Uncle Nelson, yes. A revolutionary must become a cold killing machine motivated by pure hate. It doesn't seem to fit somehow. That's like, where does this fit into good neighborliness? Just this year, 1st of January till 31st July, 43 farm murders. But a lot more attacks, 288 attacks. Notice there's more attacks than murders, meaning most of the attacks fail, which means despite the attackers having the advantage of numbers, weapons, and surprise, farmers are still managing to defend themselves effectively, which is extraordinary. Oldest victim on a farm being attacked, 88. And this just speaking about the last 7 months, first 7 months of this year. Look at this kind of blasphemy you get from Blackland First Leader Andili. Every time I hear the name Jesus, I'm reminded of white people. I'm glad he won't come back, because if he comes back, we will kill him again and cremate his body. Now, good luck to this low-life scumbag, because one day he's going to call for the mountains to fall on him. He'd rather be buried under an avalanche and face the wrath of the Lamb of God when he comes back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And Jesus Christ came as a Savior the first time. The next time he's not coming as Savior, he's coming as Judge, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and as a conqueror. And these fools who make these kind of blasphemous statements, they will be screaming out for the mountains to cover them. It is a fundamental principle of justice that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Due process of law is essential. Checks and balances are vital. No person should be deprived of their property without due process in court, with all reasonable opportunities to defend themselves against any and all charges. These lands were not stolen. These lands are hacked out of the wilderness. These farms, in many cases, like in Franschhoek, have been possessed by families for 8, 10, 12 generations in some cases. How can you say that this land is not owned by the people whose family's been there from great-grandfather onwards, but somebody who just came into the Western Cape last week, he's got the right to go and take it? How's that not theft? This is actually, when you get down to it, not just greed, not just hate, anti-Christian, that desires to break the power of Christianity in this country. You cannot pronounce a whole people group guilty of any crime. It's not rational, nor is it fair. If any individual is stolen or expropriated without compensation, let that be tested in a court in accordance with the law. We've got enough laws against theft. If there's been expropriation without compensation, take it to court, prove it, give the person a chance to defend themselves, and if there's been theft, then let's see restitution done. But to suddenly declare to everyone all this is just a cover for crime. Don't do anything against your neighbor you wouldn't want done to yourself. Do to others what you'd want done to yourself. Restitution must be done by a convicted criminal to the victims directly and entirely. Restitution is always personal. It's not political. It's not right for people who did not do any crime to be required to do restitution to people who were not the victim. Restitution is not meant to be a scam for politicians to go on a vote while they loot the country for corruption, taxation, inflation. If our government really wants to help the poor, they must stop stealing from them by corruption. They're the biggest thieves of all. The African Union estimates that 25% of the gross domestic product is stolen by corruption by government every single year. 25%. Over R1 trillion is stolen by our government every year, not even counting what privatized criminals do. We're just talking about the nationalized criminals. Corruption is killing us. If the ANC wants to empower the poor, how about giving them legal title deeds to their own homes so that they may have collateral with which to secure loans? Do you know, in the 24 years of the worthless existence of the ANC, they haven't given title deeds for people in the townships, for example. They can't get a loan because they don't own their land. If the state wants to create jobs and grow the economy, then they must respect private ownership of property. They must not erode constitutional safeguards, because if they erode constitutional safeguards, they'll chase away investors, entrepreneurs, tourists, and job creators. And every one of these skilled workers provides employment for 10 unskilled workers. And so the millions of white South Africans chased out of this country have resulted in 30 million unemployed black people in this country. We had about 2 million unemployed in 1994 when Mandela became president, in a total population of 29 million. Now we've got 30 million unemployed in a country of 58 million. We've increased unemployment in this country by 1,000% since Mandela became president. This is the result of ANC policies. Socialism is always the pathway to ruin. Let us rather follow examples of excellence like Singapore, which you'd notice that Helen Zille got into deep trouble when she made a positive comment that Singapore has gone past their colonial past to making a bright future, and you'd have sworn she committed a thought crime. Let us rather follow examples of excellence in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland is an example of the most decentralized country on earth, the most positive country on earth. They put a plus on their flag. And it's grown out of the Reformation and out of the darkness of the worst times of the Inquisition. They crafted a strong, free country. How did they do it? Because they've got French, German, and Italians. They've got Protestants and they've got Catholics, and even some Romans. Well, they do it by such a decentralized model that it doesn't matter that you may disagree violently with your neighbor because they've got no power of your life. They don't have a central government that's got any strength. Everything's down to the local, regional, municipal, canton level. And decentralization is the model for progress. That's the model. If you want to get poverty, go centralization and socialism. If you want to get prosperity and freedom, go decentralization. It's biblical. Create tax havens. Notice some of the richest places in the world. Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Channel Islands, Bermuda, Bahamas. What do these places have in common? Tax havens. People like to take their business and invest and move to a place where they're not going to have everything confiscated by socialist taxes. And so if we want Cape Town to be booming, do you know Hong Kong had a bigger economy than the whole of Red China? Now, you'd miss that right now because now Hong Kong's economy is added to Red China's economy so it makes it look like China's really soared. That's because they amalgamated with British-run Hong Kong in 1997. So if you put a chart like, wow, China's... Yes, but it's mostly from Hong Kong, actually. It's the tax havens. Hong Kong doesn't even have enough water for itself. It doesn't have any natural resource. It's a small area, but it's got a tax haven, free enterprise, and boom. If we want prosperity and freedom, we need to respect life and property. Like, just take the Netherlands, where many of our ancestors come from. And boy, do you see farms well run. Talk about well run, even color-coded. So the Netherlands is just extraordinary. And the church is at the center of it, time and again. The only hope for our country is to turn away from race politics and hate. We need to love one another. We need to turn to God in humility, to humble ourselves, and pray and seek his face and turn from our wicked ways. Then God will hear from heaven. He will forgive our sins and heal our land. I've got lots of hope for the Cape. Every one of us on the day of judgment will one day stand before Almighty God and give an account for every word we've ever spoken. I thought that while I was sitting in that hideous, hideous parliamentary hearings and hearing the hate and the insane, stupid, mindless, evil utterances of so many. I thought, you will have to stand before Almighty God one day and give an account for what you said. And for those who weren't there and who didn't want to stand up and speak out, they'll have to give an account for what they didn't do and didn't say, for not standing up. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one will receive the things done in the body according to what he's done, whether good or bad. So, we've written already on Farms and Freedom Under Fire in South Africa, and the 9 stages to genocide in South Africa, and fearless farmers who fight back. Those on those newsletters. We've got videos of those previous ones on our website. Articles, you'll see if you go onto our reformationsa.org website, a whole range of links to videos and audios. Also on our Reformation 500 Facebook page. There's books on history which backs it up. If you go on the Henry Morton Stanley website, you'll find a lot of these presentations in video form, of these evening presentations from Thursday nights, also articles and also links to the audios. And on our social media page, HMFS or Henry Morton Stanley School of Christian Journalism, we've got more. If you go on the video and audio gallery of the Frontline Mission SA, you'll get many of these links in their different categories under history or Reformation or political and so on. And every Tuesday night on our From the Frontline podcast, we are tackling different issues like these and sharing them widely. So these are just some of our platforms, but all got one goal: destruction of every high thought raised against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive. So any questions, any comments?